So yeah, right off the bat, kind of morning, everyone. 9:03 on the nose. We'll kind of get started here, at least 9:03 Pacific time. So there's a whole bunch of sort of rules to webinars and demos. So usually it's a bit of housekeeping right off the bat. So one, my name's John. For anyone who doesn't know me, although I recognize a lot of faces here, it's great to see everybody. Um, I'm going to be recording this morning, which is going to be cool. So if you need to kind of bounce out, I can kind of catch up on that afterwards. If you can mute your mics, want to kind of get going, that would be fantastic. There'll be opportunities for some questions as we go. I'm going to try to keep it fairly high level. I've done a number of these demos in the past, and sometimes I can get a little too deep into the weeds, a little too nerdy on the tech. And as a result, sometimes there's a little threshold where I get a little too nerdy and I lose a few folks there. It would be no different than someone sitting down learning Nuke or Houdini for the first time, never seeing the software. And if I get too much into the weeds, it gets a bit funky. But with that in mind, I can stick around afterwards, after the hour, if anyone wants to really, really kind of get into the guts of how the software works. I'm happy to stick around for that and go a little deeper into it there. I've also got, I think I put it in the chat, a form there as well. So a lot of the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to be giving this software away free to individual VFX producers to use on projects there. And so you can sort of sign up there if you want to, just so I can get you in a separate email list there for when that is live and ready. We should be early to mid-January, depending on how things work on the development front. So that's kind of the basics there of the housekeeping sort of stuff. If you have questions, I do have an iPad going beside me here, and I can see questions pop up. So you're welcome to type them up as we kind of go, and we can rock along from there. So I welcome the questions. So right off the top, what have I done? I have built a what-if scenario type tool here. Form again. That should be in the top of the notes there. I'll share it again for you, Jody, as I get going a little bit there too. So. So the challenge that I kind of ran into is I've been in the visual effects industry for 25 years. Most of that as a visual effects supervisor, but for the last 6.5 years, I was the head of studio for Fuse Effects in Vancouver. So in that role, I've sort of seen it all. If you're not familiar with Fuse, Fuse does a lot of episodic television work. I think on average, I was running 10 to 12 projects at any given time, not to mention multiple episodes, not to mention all of the shows that you're bidding and trying to fit in there, multiplying that by other locations and shared work in that model. I think I was averaging between 120 and 140 people at any kind of given time there. So that's a system that has a whole whack of complexity to it and a lot of variables. And a lot of what we built here is kind of designed to sort of solve that problem. So really the problem I'm trying to solve is this, right? That's a great question. Let me get back to you. And that can be anything from trying to plan for a new project kind of coming in or a change in schedule. Did you get the full award or the half award? Do we have enough compositors to do this? Do we have enough animators to do this? Is the render farm going to be free? All of those what if type questions. And in my experience there, the challenge is as these systems get larger and larger and larger, it gets harder and harder to answer these questions. When my twin boys were born 9 years ago, a little bit of the origin story, we started having a bunch of what ifs in my family there. And I looked at Excel spreadsheets and I built crazy, crazy models there to try and figure out all of our personal finances here on the home front. And I ran into roadblocks there, just simply too much complexity, not to mention time. And as I'm sitting there looking over the shoulders of visual effects artists there, we see this sort of node-based type architecture in this timeline type architecture. And that was kind of my aha moment that there could be a better way to build scenarios for planning more intelligently. So that's kind of the origin of how we kind of got into what we're doing here today. So really quickly, here's the agenda. So I'm going to do a brief intro, which I've already started there, origin story, which I've already started as well. I'm going to touch on some whatifi basics, really high level, how the software kind of works conceptually, because it is a radically different approach than a spreadsheet. I'm going to show you very quickly how to build the most basic of models, just so you can understand the interface and the UI. And then I'm going to get into a couple of case studies. So I'm going to show one case study of how I'm building scenarios for Godzilla Season 2 as if I was a vendor. And then for the VFX producers in the room here that are client side, I'm also going to show one how I'm using the same software to build it as if I was client side on things. And in the end, I'm going to show you a little bit about how VFX producers can get access to the software and answer a couple of basic questions. Really, really important. This software is not just for visual effects. It's actually agnostic. It'd be no different than an Excel spreadsheet that can be used in many, many, many different industries. And so today I'm just showing you sort of one use case, which is visual effects. I've already got folks that are using it in other spaces, including software as a service, e-commerce. I've got some fractional CFOs that are using it. So it really is just a different way to build models. But having spent 25 years in visual effects, this is obviously a better place for me to kind of dig into. Plus, I understand the problem more so than others. I like to kind of call a problem the $1,000,000 problem. So in visual effects, we have these $1,000,000 decisions. They move around on the timeline, and they can make all the difference in the world on whether a facility is profitable or not, whether a show delivers on time or not, and all the drama that can kind of go along with multiple shows all stacking up against each other. So that's a little bit of the agenda for today. There's some folks that are joining. Welcome aboard. So again, a quick recap. My name is John. I've been in visual effects for 25 years. I have an industrial engineering background, a fine arts background, and a digital animation background. So what you're sort of seeing today is probably an amalgamation of all three of those. The engineering, industrial engineering is process engineering, how you design factories and workflows to be able to maximize those kind of processes. And I'm bringing that same sort of knowledge to visual effects at this stage. So what is it? It is a node-based visual way of building financial models, scenario models there. I actually call them simulations to be able to understand how all these different outcomes can play out. So it's kind of a quick screen grab of what the software actually looks like, and I'll get a little deeper into it there, but it is this node-based architecture, and it allows management to see multiple what-if scenarios that are all running concurrently at the same time. And I think this solves a couple of problems there. The first one is complexity. As we get more and more complexity, more and more variables, it gets harder and harder and harder to see the future in a facility, right? Two, anyone who's ever sat in a production management meeting or even just on an individual show, everyone's trying to chase what I call the one. It's sort of the singular model that is the one that encapsulates that entire facility and all of its challenges. You know, should this number be a 1 or a 5 or a 6? Is our likelihood of award 20%, 30%, or 40%? Do we start in January? Do we start in August? All of those things, everyone's trying to figure out that one singular model. And the reality is there's absolutely no chance that that's correct. And as we get more and more complexity in the system, there's even less and less and less of a chance of that one being correct. But that's the one single model that everyone's trying to build their plan for. As a result, we kind of get in this reactionary mode where instead of being able to truly plan out 100% of the facility's work or the show side work, instead I'd argue that maybe we're pre-planning 20% of it, and the other 80% becomes a bunch of micro-reactionary responses there. And then the last part is really speed, just how long it takes for these models to get built and put together there. You have a question, whether production manager has a question, you're getting ready for the Wednesday staffing meeting. It just takes too long to assemble all this stuff together. So that's the problem that I'm trying to solve. Really quickly, how I intend it to be used. First and foremost, it's for in-house resource projections there, whether it's an individual visual effects producer or a production management or resource team, to be able to see actuals versus needed staffing for projects. I know there's a couple of client-side VFX producers on the show here, and I'm going to show an example of how I think it can be used on that side to manage multiple bids across multiple vendors and look at how the entire show nets out budget-wise in different scenarios. Relatively soon, we're going to be releasing location-based simulations as well. So for some of the larger companies, like whether it's DNEG that has offices here, and here, you'll also be able to map out what happens if you spread the work amongst different facilities. That can get into tax credits, that can get into exchange rates, that can get into resources, things like this. And then ultimately, it can go all the way up the stack to senior management there to be able to sit there and look at all of the organization's finances and how all of the show volume factors into that. Okay. So what makes VFX scenario planning unique? Scale, staffing, timing, and the fact that none of our shows are carbon copies of anything. Every show is unique, and I think it makes it extra challenging to scenario plan and model. I'm going to take a breath there for a second because my wife says I talk too fast. Any questions there before I dig a little deeper into the software and show you some use cases?
I just had one actually. You
Yeah.
mentioned in there about staffing, and I think you touched on it earlier, but does that include, will it include things like software, hardware, render farm, and things like that to be able to, like, because I feel like that's also
Yep.
resources and not just people.
Yeah. So think of the best way of thinking about this is I have taken Excel and the full sort of wide open functionality of Excel, and I've turned all into these little tiny Lego blocks that you can connect together, which means that anything that you can do in a spreadsheet, you can in theory do in my architecture. The difference, though, is that I allow you to have multiple versions of those scenarios all running kind of concurrently. So the answer is almost always going to be yesish, right? And it's just about how you sort of assemble your whatifi scenario to do that. So an example I'm going to show you today, it has a couple of even like render farm calculations and things like that. They can be part of that. Okay, cool. All right, so a quick roadmap right now. So the individual producer version I'm launching this January. So you'll be able to track individual projects. It's going to have a basic shot grid integration in there, no cost. You can share scenarios with other teams, management, CSV exports. Really the goal there, full transparency, is I'm trying to get in from the bottom of some of these visual effects studios. I'm having wonderful conversations with senior management, but it just takes time for new systems to work their way through the chain. Plus, a lot of visual effects studios don't have a lot of capital right now to be purchasing software. So I'm having success there, but a lot of this idea is, can I also kind of get closer to the people that actually have the real problem there and work my way up? In March, we're going to be releasing our production management version, which means that production management can aggregate all of the individual shows from all the individual producers to now look at facility-wide scenarios there. So that when we're horse trading compositors or trackers or animators, we can understand how that fits into overall deliverables. In May, we're going to be multi-location. We're also really leaning into artificial intelligence as well. So eventually, we will be very Jarvis-like, and you'll be able to have conversations with your models and ask questions, text-based questions to that one, and the models will automatically build and update. So instead of having to fill in a bunch of values, you could say, hey, what if the next season of House of the Dragon pushes out by 2 months? And we'll automatically build that model in parallel there. So it can really speed up this question and answer type thing here for our models. It's the future. Trust me, it's going to be pretty cool. So today, actually, I'm going to do one thing. I'm just going to show you, just as a sneak peek, what we'll be looking at today model-wise here. So I'm going to be showing you how to very quickly build a basic scenario just so you understand how the software works. We're going to be working through a fictional Godzilla Season 2 model here. This is sort of vendor side, so this will all make a bit more sense in a second. And for the client side producers here, I'm going to pretend we're client side on Godzilla and we're looking at multiple bid packs, multiple vendors that are bidding on that one, and understanding what the budgets and the tax credits are in all of these different scenarios at the same time. So that's a little bit of a sneak peek. Before I do that, I like to jump over to this to show you some core concepts of just how the technology works. So you connect together these pre-built business logic events. Back to Excel, I've extracted, a particular piece of logic and we kind of bubbled it down into this Lego piece. And you connect these pieces together to build out a model, no different than a visual effects artist might have a file node and a color correct node and a resize node. It's the same sort of logic, but I allow you to create these branches along that calculation flow where you can look at scenario A or scenario B, and then they feed back together to come to your outcomes there. So that's really where we start to kind of get into the multiverse model here of looking at scenarios. We have these events. There's different types. There's decision events, import events that allow you to pull data in from spreadsheets, from shot grid, from other sort of sources there. Inputs, calculations, modifiers. There's a whole library of these. We built about 30 of them so far. Cause and effect. That's really what the software is. It's designed to calculate cause and effect. Sometimes the order of these events matters. So for example, if I'm looking at the resources I have and how much I've utilized, that helps me calculate capacity. And that order of these events or nodes really matters. Other things are really just plus or minus events there, and it doesn't really matter. So sometimes when you're looking at some of the scenarios, you may be asking, why is this before this? It's just dealer's choice. It doesn't really matter on how those are put together. Okay. Each of these events can contain many, 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 many different records inside of it. So for example, I could drop in an employee event and have filtered everyone who's in the Vancouver office or the London office. And all of that metadata and all that information comes along for the ride. So each of these can represent a lot of information packed inside of them. Integrations, ShotGrid, Excel, whatever it is, we're able to pull this information in to inform the model. So these models are dynamic and updating all the time. Or if you spend all your time in Excel spreadsheets, we allow you to import that in and automatically build out some of the node structure there. So we're trying to make it very easy to build models, and we're also trying to avoid you having to maintain two different systems at the same time. So this is the kind of core concept here, really. So it's the idea of threads. So every unique path through this decision tree type framework becomes one version of the multiverse, right? And we call them a thread. So this is one particular thread here. You could have a second thread here and a third thread here. And as you can imagine, these can very quickly become larger and larger and larger. I think the largest one I'm going to show you today has 12 threads in it, but I have clients that have 200 threads all at the same time. Now that might seem like overkill, but here's the thesis, right? Back to connecting and building out that singular model there. Again, there's no chance that that's actually correct. There's going to be variability in that for sure. There's even going to be bias. People are putting numbers in there that might look good to management. My thesis is instead, let's have 100 different outcomes there. Let's be able to build them very, very quickly. And instead, let's look for patterns. So in 80% of our scenarios, it looks like we're not going to have enough compositors to get the work done in January. We should be talking to recruiting well in advance, because this looks like it's going to be a problem. In 50% of the scenarios, looks like it might happen. So you're really looking for trends in the models as opposed to one singular model. And anyone who spent a lot of time in a production management meeting knows that people have become too attached to that one model. Let's be able to see all of those and be able to make decisions that are based upon that. And as information solidifies, we can start to make some decisions that starts to remove the complexity in that model. So for example, maybe I was looking at hiring Bill or hiring Sue. Maybe we think the project was supposed to start in January or may not turn over to February. When those things are unknown, they become options. But at any particular stage, you can lock in one of those particular pieces. It grays out some of those other threads and starts to reduce the complexity of the model at the same time. But because you have the history, at any particular stage, you can go back, you can unlock some of these things, you can try out different scenarios at the same time too. So it's a planning tool, but it's also designed to be a decision-making tool at the same time. This piece is a little bit heady, but it's really the idea that in a traditional spreadsheet, you have financial calculations, and then you're trying to figure out how to apply those to time. If you've ever sat in the editing suite and looked over an editor's shoulders, you know that time is the first thing that we start with, right? And then we apply modifications and calculations to the timeline. Our software works the same way. Everything is timeline based underneath the hood. So maybe the Vancouver office has 30 employees, and maybe we're looking at ramping up overtime starting in August. You can put these time-based calculations on there and see what their effect is, which is really, really hard to do in a spreadsheet. So everything is in an account structure. So if I'm keeping track of how many senior compositors and intermediate compositors and junior compositors I have, this information rolls up and rolls up and rolls up. So it's really easy to keep track of all of these layers of information inside of a scenario. That's a fair bit. I know that was a mouthful there. So before I kind of jump into the scenarios, and I can't see if people are nodding their heads or not, did that all make sense, or was that a little gnarly? I'm going to assume that made sense there. Ozen has a question. Is there an option to add notes to the nodes or paths? Absolutely. So you can document what's in there at the same time too, 100%. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump over to our first little case study here. And I'm going to show you, one, just how to use the software. Let me just find my screen things here on how to use the software and build out a real simple model. And then we'll kind of get into these bigger ones here. So we're going to build out this very quickly, okay? Income, expenses, 2 different hiring choices, and we're going to lock in one of those choices. Yes, there'll be an integration with Google Sheets, David, absolutely. Google Sheets is actually the easiest. They make it really easy. Microsoft is a little bit more gated, and they make it a bit more challenging. So I've got a blank scenario here right now. I am going to click around. I'm not going to explain too much what I'm doing here because that gets into the weeds. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I'm happy to stick around afterwards and get deeper into how the software works. But I'm able to kind of go to our library of events that we have here. I'm going to add an income event in. That event has a bunch of metadata that's inside of it. So for example, let's say this is income 1 right now. I can put something like monthly, I'm going to say $50,000. And just to be clear, this isn't going to be a visual effects scenario. This is just a scenario, okay? And I'm going to say that this revenue starts coming in what's that, January, February, March. So I'm able to add that event to my canvas, and I can now see my cash flow. I can see that $50,000 a month in repeating cash flow here in my particular model. And this could be anything. This could be employees. This could be revenue. This can be server costs. It can be anything. Now, I mentioned that we have this sort of multi-layers in here. So while I have one income stream here, I can also add in a second income stream. So here I'm going to add in income number 2 here. And this is going to be, say, a one-time thing. Maybe we're buying some servers or something like that. So $500,000 for servers. It's going to be pretty pricey, one time, and I am going to allocate that to something like, actually, this isn't income. That's the wrong thing. So let's just, yeah, there's a $500,000 spike that's kind of coming in, and let's just say that that's other income in here, and let's put that in the future to be April the 3rd. So now in my timeline, I'm able to see both of those things aggregated together. There's my one big hit, and here's my ongoing. Now I'm going to add an expense. So let's put something in like a basic expense event here right now. And maybe this is our server. All right, so let's say we've got our server here now. This is going to be $300,000. I'm actually going to amortize this expense over 3 months. We're going to do that monthly. And that is going to start in something like July. So again, core concepts here, just being able to add in these. So my cash flow, I'm seeing both of these. This might resonate with some of the client-side producers in the house, but I'm able to also look at these things individually. So now I'm looking at just my income, or I can bubble up expenses here and look at just my expenses. Again, madly clicking around, but just kind of some core concepts. So now we're looking at a hiring decision. I'm going to add in a decision event, which is required anytime you have an option there. And again, that's where you can kind of put in some of your notes there at the same time too. Maggie's asking, so in expenses, you need to enter each artist. I'll show you that. I give you the ability to put in individual artists or to put in placeholders. I'm hiring 10 junior compositors there. And eventually we have integrations in with some of the HR tools as well. So you don't even have to do that. You could just pull start dates and end dates and contract dates all from external tools there. Really, the idea is to make this as dynamic as possible and that you're not having to do manual updates or minimize it as much as possible. So I'm going to put in an employee here. Maybe we're looking at hiring another producer or something. So there's Bill who's available to us. Bill is going to be an employment expense. I'm going to put that under the Vancouver office, and I'm just going to actually put Vancouver in here at the same time too. You can put dollar values in here if you need to or not. Let's just say for whatever reason, that's $60 an hour and 40 hours a week there, and Bill can start in May, all right? And I'm missing one field here. Oh, I'm going to pay that bi-weekly. So I've now added Bill to the model, and now we're starting to see Bill's paycheck. But we also have the option of hiring Sue at the same time too. I'm just going to put Bill's name up here. So I'm going to take Bill, I'm going to copy Bill, and I'm going to paste Bill, and change this to Sue, change this to Sue, and maybe Sue is $70 an hour, but she can only work 30 hours a week, and she is going to be based out of a different office. Maybe that's the Toronto office, and she can't start for another 2 months, right? So now, is there a way to hide some of the data like wages? Absolutely. Yep, that's going to be pretty important. As we get into our permission system, we realize that not everyone's going to want to be able to see all that information. So here now, I have 2 scenarios actually. I have scenario 1 and scenario 2 all living out here at the same time. And I can now see both of these living kind of concurrently in my model. whether I'm looking at cash flow or whatever it is, I now have two versions of the multiverse that are playing out. So that's really kind of core concept that's there. And as I mentioned before, at any particular stage, we can go and lock in a decision. So maybe ultimately we think Sue is the best candidate for this job. I'm going to lock in Sue. That's going to gray out Bill. And now I'm down just to a single scenario. Super high level, but just kind of core concepts of how the software works. I'm going to pause there for a quick second if there's any other kind of questions there. Otherwise, I'm going to jump into a real use case. All good? All right, kind of jumping in. So what I've built here, and again, keep in mind these are demo ones. They're very high level and simple, and there's a lot more kind of complexity in a real model here. But I believe a good scenario tells a story. I believe a spreadsheet can tell that story, but it can be very, very complicated. And whoever built the spreadsheet and whoever's receiving the spreadsheet, that can be a very challenging conversation trying to understand someone's logic. I would argue that in this node-based workflow, it's a lot easier to tell that story, to share that, to sit in a meeting, and for someone to understand the cause and effect of what's potentially playing out. So what is capacity, right? Here's a vendor. They're bidding on the next season of Godzilla. There's 3 bid packs right now. They're trying to figure out what do they have, what do they need, and how are they going to figure out how to handle the delta between those. So capacity is really what you've got, which are your current employees or contract employees. It's what you need, which is the bidding and resources. And I'm going to open these up in a second. You'll see there's more detail inside here. There's what you've used, which is our shot grid utilization, which I'm not going to be able to showcase today, but I can give you an example of how it's going to work. And then ultimately, capacity is the calculation between those. What you've got minus what you need, minus what you've used, what's left over, and how are you going to scenario plan. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. I've already shown you what an employee event looks like, but in this employee event, for example, I have used our placeholders. So I've said that we have staff compositors. We have 28 staff compositors here. I have some dollar value information, which can be hidden here, and I've got a start date. So I know when that group of people is available to me. I can also have individual people in here. So here's Bill, who's a tracker in the Vancouver office. So there's a specific employee. And I also have 20 lighters available in the Vancouver office. I can also have contracts, right? Start dates and end dates are super, super important here. So here I have trackers. I've got 6 people on a contract that we're planning on hiring. So this isn't just about what you've got, it's also about what you have planned. So currently Resources is looking at hiring, 6 more trackers for this upcoming work there as a potential use case. And I also have more senior compositors here, start dates, end dates, all of this. So I'm able to, back to this account structure, now go and take a look at what do we got. So I can look at my employees, I can look at my artists, and I can see those individual departments. So we can bring up and bubble up all of this information if we want to. I can even drill in deeper and kind of get into seniors and juniors and intermediates if we need to be able to do that. And now I'm able to see, for example, in this model, how many artists do we have planned, right? How many compositors do we have planned? And lighters and trackers. And you can look at all this information at the same time here to get a profile for what's available within a facility, within a project, within an entire company there in this particular model, because it all rolls up. So here's what we've got. All right. Next up is what do we need? So this is this concept.
Question.
Yep.
Sorry, I have a
Go
question
for
for
it.
the employees. So, does this take into consideration the fact that they're in the company, but does it take into consideration bookings on other shows as well?
Yes. That's where the shot grid integration is going to come in. Now, what I'm trying to do, and this is where I'm going to be looking for some feedback, I'm trying not to be an individual scheduling tool where I'm doing the assignments. I'm trying to be a tool where I inherit that information from other systems there and then use that to build out calculations. So in many respects, this can depend how individual studios handle some of that and how I'm able to kind of pull that information in. On a high level, I'm trying to be, do you have enough trackers available, right? As opposed to, is Bill available and is Sue available and is Ted available? But all of that is possible in the system. It just depends on how complex you want to make your model. So it's not the best answer there for you, but it is the idea that the thesis is 80-20. If we get super, super granular and you can't make any decisions until everything is perfectly wired up, then I think these things can take too long. I think there's a sweet spot about being able to move quickly and put in sort of round numbers there and understand where the problems are. go and change those other things in your system and then pull that information in to see if it solves the problem. That make sense?
Okay, so if a studio uses a lot of the shot grid bookings, like for booking staff, like all their staff is in there and they book them on the show, so we can see who's
Yeah.
available, who is not, and if ever the capacity is is suitable or not at this point. So that would be possible to tie both
Yeah.
together.
The shot grid integration is going to be a huge part there. Whether we get into what is it, PF track or whatever it is, we'll kind of get into that at a future stage. But right now, we're just looking at supporting shot grid, and that's what we're deep in right now, is being able to do that for sure.
Okay.
There might be a future version where we push information back to shot grid as well, but that's a little bit more tricky right now. I want to ingest information from shot grid there, so you'll be able to see that. Right?
Yeah, because shot grid is very very limited for planning resources and what ifs. So
yeah, and I think that becomes a challenge there too, right? So there's just a single version of things there, and that's it, right? And I want to be able to support multiple versions of things there too, and that's really the sweet spot in my software. Right? So let's pretend we've got 3 bid packs that have kind of come in, and I'm going to expand this. There's a few little UI things here that we're still working on, so you're going to see a few things bounce around sometimes. But what is a project? A project is the money coming in. It is the resources that are going to be required it. And back to your question, Ozen, it can be, what other expenses or things that are associated with this. This can get larger and larger and larger, but I wrap them up into these buckets called containers so that you can now manage that entire project. You can take that project and you can slide it around the timeline. You can change the size of it, start dates, milestones. So in here, I have a contract event, a resource event, and some expense events. So let's start by looking at a contract, right? So in a contract, I may, as a vendor, have bid $3.2 million to do this work, all right? It's going to start in January. It's going to run for 8 months. I can even put some milestones in here at the same time. This is where you're starting to see some of the finance piece in here. I can put in payment terms and when the money comes in. This may not be important to a producer, but trust me, it matters as you work the way up the stack in cash flow here. So I have this information. So I am able to, for each of these bid packs, I can look at things like my income here. So let me just bubble up income, and I can see the profile of the show. Income should be in here somewhere. I can see the profile for the show. So here are all 3 of my bid packs, when all the money is coming in, and I can see that it's a total of $8.6 million that I bid for this particular project. But keep in mind the interactive nature. At any particular stage, I could choose to take this entire project out there just for a second to interactively see what this looks like. No one would do that on an on-the-fly Excel spreadsheet, but I can take that out ever briefly, and I can put that back on. So you can very quickly do some interactive things with the model here if you want to. You can also go in and bypass individual things. So I've temporarily taken the AWS costs out, and I've temporarily put them back in. Okay, so you can either do things very quickly like that, or you can actually build scenarios where those are, what happens if A happens, and what happens if B happens. It's meant to be interactive, right? The second piece, we know what money that's kind of coming in. Now we can look at what we're actually going to need to do the work. Okay, we have an importer, so you can import in a tab from an Excel spreadsheet, and it will automatically build these for you. So this doesn't have to be a manual exercise. For the purposes of this, I've kept it very, very simple here. But I'm saying for this particular body of work, I know that I've got 400 bid days of tracking required. Okay, and I've got a start date and an end date here. You can just inherit the start date and end date from the bid, or you can go in there and be granular about some of these things, right? I've got, for lighters, I have 3,000 bid days, and for compositors, I have 2,200 bid days. So that's sort of step number 1. What do you need to actually do the work? One of my biggest beefs is it's all fine on paper to say what you need, but that's not really how the work gets done, right? So we've added in a feature here that I'm pretty proud of called distribution. So let's be realistic. If I am trying to get all of my tracking done in 3 months, I may want to front load all of my tracking. I want to try and get as much of that done here. We know that's going to wind down over time. So I'm going to apply a distribution to this body of work, and it's going to allocate those days in that particular pattern. I think that better reflects how production actually happens versus just the straight amortization over time, all right? Or we can look at something like compositing, for example. So here's my 2,200 days of compositing. And maybe I initially was planning on ramping up over the duration of the show, but then the client comes along and reminds us that there's going to be a temp delivery or a trailer delivery, I can now add that weighting into the model. It takes all of those bid days, turns them into people, and then turns them into a profile of how and what I'm going to need over time. And I think this is a pretty big deal, something that I'm pretty proud of. All right. So with that in mind, when we're able to sort of see that distribution, thanks, David, we can now kind of go in and start looking at what are we going to need. I'm going to open these up here, each of these, just so you can see that I've got a repeated sort of pattern here. All right. And so let's take a look at what we're going to need. So I have compositors needed, right? Here's the profile for all 3 episodes of what my compositor need is going to be for the show. Or here's the profile for my lighter need, or here's the profile for my tracking, which is kind of front loaded. So you can sit there and you can look at, on a project basis, if we're awarded all this work, this is what the future looks like, right? This is the profile for the show, which I think is really, really important. You can start to look for challenges in there. You can start to think about, maybe I need to do odds and evens and have a separate team that's doing episode, 202 as opposed to episode 201. You can start to look for some patterns in the data, right? I also support the ability to go as granular as you want to there. So you can stay very high level, or you can get really into the weeds. So maybe we want to go and look at individual bids here, right? And now I can sit there and I can look at just this episode and this episode and this episode. And let's just remove a little bit of the data here to make it a little bit easier. So now I'm able to see what it looks like here just for compositors, or just for tracking, right? And it gives you a sense of where your schedule is fat and where it's lean and where you're going to run some of your challenges, okay? So that's what we're going to need to do the work. I'm just going to turn that off here and kind of come back up to this level. AWS costs, those are pretty straightforward. You can make that a percentage of other things. I'm going to glaze over that, but just to kind of show that that's in the system there. And then the last part is, what are we actually going to need to do the work? A minus B, right? So that's where I kind of get into capacity. So I can now look at something and I can sort of see on an overall artist level where I am over capacity and where I'm under capacity for the entire project. But we could also drill down if you want to, and you can start to look at, again, these individual categories. So now I'm looking at specifically compositor capacity here, right? And if I'm sitting in a production management meeting, it's like, guys, I'm going to be 35 compositors short there, but I don't need all these people up front. I'm not ready for them yet, okay? Or tracking, same sort of thing. You can start to see that some of that variability in the model. So for capacity, and this would be more something for production management, right? We all know that production isn't necessarily one-to-one. Just because you need 5 people doesn't mean you're going to get 5 people. One of the questions that I get, and this is definitely something that will be in version 2 of the roadmap, is we give you the ability to weight artists based on their seniority, right? Yes, you can bend this curve. You can't bend this curve, Howard. Here, this is sort of the result of that one. You bend it by kind of going up and adding extra data upstream in there too. So capacity might be also, now what's your scenario plan? So in our capacity event, we allow you to apply different profiles to how you want to solve the capacity problem. The default is, in tracking, we're going to staff to 100% of the need. How many trackers do we need to hire? But you can also go in and say, well, maybe for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we're going to do 6-day weeks, or maybe we're going to staff to 90% of what we need. So basically it's an overtime type scenario there. And that will change the math for that period of time on how you want to deal with the capacity shortfall or overage on things. So you could very easily, I'm not going to do it in this model here, you could very easily build multiple capacity plans for multiple departments for different date ranges on how you're going to solve shortfalls and things. And the idea there is that production management isn't running out trying to necessarily find somebody to solve a short-term problem. But if you see a long-term problem, it's like we may need to aggressively hire, maybe we need to outsource that work. You can start to look at what some of those plans are longer term. I'm going to pause there for a second because I'm already kind of getting a little into the weeds, but any questions about how that works kind of conceptually? Yeah, so Ozen's asking if OT costs will be added into that one. It's all math, right? And so that can all be sort of factored in so you can see what that means when those hours increase. That's the idea. We're going to be adding layers and layers and layers to it, but ultimately it's really meant to help you figure out capacity, but also what's the financial ramification. Is a show still going to be profitable at the same time? The hope is that you can see your capacity problems well in advance so that you can solve those weeks and months in advance as opposed to at the last minute with expensive solutions. And it's also meant to kind of give you the tools to be able to sit there very easily with production management and resources, and for people to understand what the ramifications are of some of these challenges. Right? Other things that we can kind of do in here, and I'll just sort of turn some of these on really quickly for you. It's when we start to kind of get into some of the what ifs. So maybe there's rumor that this particular bid pack and this particular turnover could be pushed out down the line. So we have this thing called a modifier. What is the maximum time window it shows? You can control that. You can do 10 years if you want to. I think this is a 2-year model right now, or a 3-year model, but yeah, in theory, it can go long. It's just time on AWS for those all to calculate. So now we have a scenario where this is supposed to kind of turn over and start on a given day, but we're hearing rumor that it might push, right? So we have this thing called a modifier that allows me to reach upstream and change something in one version of the multiverse. Typically what you do in a spreadsheet is you would duplicate a tab, you would change a value, you'd flip back and forth, maybe you change that number and you change it back again. We allow those to live all at the same time. So here what I'm doing is I am reaching upstream to that contract event, specifically episode 203, bid pack number 1, which is currently $1.2 million. And I'm saying there's a world where A, it may only be $600,000. So I can understand what that does. I'm cutting that in half, and it will cut all of those resources in half at the same time too. And I'm adding a second modifier here that says, and I'm hearing rumor that that contract start date, which was originally January, February, March, April 1st, is going to push out by 4 months. And now that entire body of work is going to push out into the future, all right? So now I have a second scenario that's here. I'm going to turn these on ever so briefly. So they're now calculating. I had those bypassed. And I can sit there and sort of see this in a couple of different ways. I'm going to look for my income here. So one, income. If I look at both of those scenarios, I can see that some of that work has pushed out there. And I can also see that the dollar value of that project has also decreased as well. So keep in mind, you don't have to go into all this sort of level of detail. If you want to, you can keep it really, really high level. But I give you the tools to drill down and drill down and drill down and get deeper into that kind of given model. You can look at this information lots of different ways. So if you want to, you can still look at it in your good old-fashioned spreadsheet here at the same time too. You can export all this out to a CSV file. I give you the ability to look at some of this information in a different light. So I'm going to go back to, for example, compositor capacity, right? So let's look at capacity here. And so let me just turn one of these on. Oh, I may have hit my first little bump here. I can just do a quick refresh here, guys. This seems to be hanging up for some reason. Oh, there we go. So I'm in one scenario right now, and I am able to sit there and look at capacity for the project, right? Where am I overstaffed and where am I understaffed? I can see those all here in real time, and I can drill down into those to see it on a global basis or on a department basis there. And again, this gives the information for production management, resources, recruiting to start thinking about what resources they might need to kind of bring on board. Okay. Running a little bit long there, so I'm going to skip over to this other model here, which is more the client side piece there too. So client side, what if I'm the client and what if I'm trying to figure out what my show looks like? I've been given $12 million to do this particular project here right now. So I have an initial starting budget of $12 million. All right. Now, bid pack number one. I have sent out to Scanline and to Frame Store and to Important Looking Pirates there. And I've asked them to kind of bid out the work, right? Ask Maggie, yes, you can look at both scenarios. You can look at all of the scenarios simultaneously. And I'll show you, this is a good example of being able to look at multiple scenarios. So here I've got this particular work. Scanline's come back and said it's going to be $2.5 million. They're going to need 8 months to do that, right? But they're in their Vancouver office. They're estimating that they can give me a 25% tax credit on this. I used to say 30%, but with all the challenges hiring, they're saying 25%. Frame Store is coming in at $2.2 million, but they're looking at a 22% tax credit, and ILP doesn't have a tax credit over there, but they come in at $2 million. So think of these as like ors. This could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. And I've done that for bid pack number one. And then, of course, we've got bid pack number 2. And so far, I've got bids back from Crafty Apes and from Rodeo there. Crafty Apes is looking at dividing that work up amongst their facilities. So Atlanta wants to take on 1.4 million of that, and Montreal can take on 2.2 million of that. So the tax credit here is just for Montreal, and I'm only applying it to that particular piece. Oops, and there's my first crash. Hang on, guys. I should have warned you there was going to be one of those. So there we go. Hang on. Let me get everything back here. All right. Boom. So, and let me Godzilla Season 2, and let me hop over to client side. All right. So, I'm able to look in here and see, that I'm only targeting the Crafty Apes Montreal and 40%. Already getting the weeds there a little bit, but you have that level of granular control if you want to build that in the model. And just so everybody knows, we do have templates, so some of these things can be pre-built for you and you're just filling them in. And for producers that are just getting up to speed with the software, I'll certainly be working with you, kind of one-on-one, learning how to build out some of these flows. A lot of it is once you build it, then you just use it. The art is in the initial build on things. Okay. In episode 3, Scanline's kind of bidding on it, and we're going to have Framestore in here too. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn this on. And this is where I start to shine, is when you kind of get into complexity. So here now, we actually have, very quickly, we have 12 different scenarios now that are all running concurrently, all right? And that's with already only just a couple of episodes and a couple of vendors that are in our system. So here, I might be able to look at something like my cumulative cash flow here. There's my initial $12 million. And in this one scenario, let's kind of look at one scenario here. In this scenario, this one thread, where I'm awarding work to Framestore and to Crafty Apes and to Scanline here. In this scenario, I'm going to have only $2.7 million left of my budget when all is said and done. I put in a goal event here that has a threshold. This is something I'm trying to keep my eye on, that I want to have sort of $2 million left around for contingency at this particular stage. I'm able to look at that model and see what that sort of plays out like. But back to the question about multiple scenarios, I can also, and this is going to be a lot of visual onslaught here, but I can also look at all 12 scenarios, and I can see the range here of how much is left in here from highest to lowest, like 2.9 million all the way down to 1.539 if I make some of these choices in my model. I can choose to look at individual vendors here at any particular stage. So maybe I'm going to look at, what am I spending potentially with Crafty Apes and Rodeo and Scanline and Framestore and ILP, and I'm going to bring all of that up. I'm going to maybe just select one scenario here, and here's my Scanline spend, right? And my Crafty Ape spend. I've got maybe nothing with Rodeo in this model. I'm going to start to see this distribution. Where am I giving maybe too much work to a single vendor? Where is it starting to feel weighted and a little bit dangerous? And then as a decision-making tool, this is where we can start to make some decisions. So maybe this particular bid pack has a lot of water work in it, and we know that Scanline's fantastic at water work. So I'm going to lock this particular decision in. You're going to see I've gone from 12 scenarios all the way down to 4 scenarios now, because now I'm just looking at this sort of variability on things. And now as more bid packs come in, as I add more work to it, I can start to manage and migrate this over time to be able to see if I can stay within my budgets. This one's a little bit more kind of complicated there, and I know there's a lot of events, but any questions about that?
Are you able to have it so if there's, I guess maybe it's more for the other version you had, but so like if there's multiple, like if you're looking overall for the whole studio, so they have multiple producers that are putting in their own kind of scenarios and they've created their own little what ifs, are you able to have like almost like a master what if that takes all those people's information into?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's very, very, very much the goal. So the idea is, and it's not going to be part of this first release there, but the idea is there's a permissions-based type of system, and scenarios can feed into scenarios, So the way that I picture it is an individual producer or even an individual show may have their what if scenario there, where they are managing their show or shows. Those all feed up to resource production management, something like that inside there, and they're able to see all of that data rolling up. And that scenario in turn can roll all the way up to heads of studios and head of productions and the C-suite to be able to see what it looks like for London and Vancouver and Toronto and Mumbai all at the same time. So you're able to see that aggregate, but also work your way down into the stack. Think of it again like maybe being in Nuke or Houdini. You can have these sub networks that you can kind of go in, make some changes, and they feed in and they feed in, they feed in. So it's really meant to nest that way. Did I answer your question, Rosa?
Yep, thank you.
Cool. Anything else there? Any other kind of questions?
I was something in a similar line to that. I'm sure a lot of people can appreciate or can empathize with this, but you'll get into a situation, you're a producer, say in the trenches, and you have a show that is going to require, say, a lot of resources up front, and you'll grudgingly get something, to get yourself started off with, maybe to work on a couple of marquee shots, to get the producer, to get your client feeling comfortable with your award.
Yeah.
But then that you've also got some other giant project that's going to eat up 75% of your company's resources for the next 6 months.
Yep.
And that you're going to be chronically under-resourced for the foreseeable future, and then you're basically sitting there stressing out while your client gets more and more concerned about where when they're going to start seeing this or that or the other thing. And you get into these scenarios where, for example, you'll be pleading for a senior compositor to do some look dev, and but then the other producer, who's also in the trenches, who's also dealing with their own stress, is like saying, "Well, I need this guy," And so I'd be curious to help sort of get everybody sort of reassured about stuff. This seems to me like there's a way here to sort of go, okay, here's the impact on your project if I take this guy for 3 weeks, or for 4 weeks, or or if we have him work 6 days, for 3 weeks, etc. And I was just wondering how that actually plays out. And then, of course,
Absolutely.
for your sort of high end, for your top level people.
I did a little joke, and I know I'm not sure if Nazim's still on the call or not, but I joked about a project that we worked on called Shantaram. And I kind of came up with a bit of a buzz term called being Shantarammed. And that's when the project before you, for whatever reason, is eating up all of the resources, whether that's a client challenge or an internal challenge or something. And that next show and the next show and the next show are all waiting for those things, and they're all kind of getting Shantarammed, waiting for the next piece to kind of come along there. It's very much that challenge. My thesis is, one, we should be able to see these things miles in advance, as opposed to it all being reactionary. And my second part to the thesis there is it's really about a measuring. So maybe you needed 15 compositors and you got 5. That means now for the remaining part of your schedule, you're actually going to need more. So I just did a bit of a refresher. Just for the record, this is my development version, so I am going to get the occasional little bug and crash that's in here. But if I'm looking at a particular show and what I'm going to need, and I'm looking at my my compositor requirements here, for example, right? I know that this is what I'm going to need to kind of get the work done. This is today, and this is where I am. So if I'm going to need 28 compositors in January and 28 compositors in February, but I get 12 and 12, with the shot grid integration and the ability to kind of pull in your actuals, right? Those, 16, those 32 resources that you didn't get will get rolled over to the remaining part of your model, so that now this will become more, this will become more, this will become more. It's going to pull that information in. I'm not sure if you saw my distribution piece, but I'm going to pop this up again here. We give you the ability to model out the distribution of resources that you need on your particular show. We know that something may be CG heavy, right? So you're going to really want to be able to weight your CG earlier in your scenario. We know that maybe other sort of things we're going to have an even distribution there. So anything that gets utilized, because also it could be the flip side. Maybe you burned a lot of your resources early in the schedule now.
I was going to say, what if you suddenly, you get a, again, something everybody can empathize with. You get an email on Friday saying, oh, by the way, next Wednesday, we're hoping to get, to do a test screening or to show some stuff to producers. Is there any way you can pump out a bunch of temps for us? And all of a sudden now it's all hands on deck, and you are scavenging resources from you're not only taking resources, you know, that you don't have, you're
Yeah.
scavenging them off of somebody else. So there's a cost there for other projects, you know, where suddenly, you know, in say my case with my company, all of a sudden the LA office is going to say, we're going to loan you, you know, 8 guys over the weekend, but that's going to cost us for this project or whatever.
Yep.
And then you have to be able to model what the cost is for them downstream as well.
And then so my hope with this one is some of these things we can control. Some of these things kind of catch us off guard. Let's control the things that we can. So we're better suited to kind of deal with the things that we can't, right? But then we also need to know the ramifications of these. One of the sort of mottos, axioms that I've got from my years in the business here is the moment you realize you're in trouble, you've actually been in trouble for 6 weeks, right? But the data is just starting to kind of catch up to you, or people that are sitting there thinking that everything is going to be okay, right? I don't really want to raise the flag yet. And then 6 weeks into it, it's like, okay, time to raise the flag. We're in trouble, right? Or adding to that one, it's also going to be personality driven. There are producers and supervisors that will ring the alarm bell, you know, the moment something goes 1 degree sideways. And then there's other people that will never do that until things are really, really far along. So you're really trying to do this by touch and feel in a management role. I think this can be data driven, and you can start to sit there and look and realize when particular shows are not pacing well and when they're going to run their challenges. I also think there's the opportunity here too that if you know your numbers, then you can have some of those more challenging conversations with the client potentially. If you don't know your numbers, then you're just triaging. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question there or not, but absolutely that's the idea, is being able to see how to solve a challenge for a particular show and the knock-on effect to other shows at the same time too, and what that means on a facility
No,
level.
that is kind of sort of what I was getting at, and also to try to find, you know, there, like you said, different producers. You know, we always think of capacity and resources stuff as like completely as absolutes, but in reality, you'll realize, oh, there's a canny producer. They're padding their resource requirements because they're trying to, you know, to not hoard, but you know, they're sort of they end up having more you know, you're looking at the data and you realize, well, actually, you know, you don't need all those people. You've been kind of hanging on to this guy and this gal, and really you know, because you feel you need them, but the numbers suggest that you could probably free up some resources for that other place that really needs them, you know, and without having to get into
the idea is trying to make this more real time too. So those conversations happen all the time within a facility, but they can take days and weeks to sort of play out. And by that time, you know, the window of opportunity is gone. You could also be talking about trying to reach out to other facilities if it's a multi-location company there too, and trying to figure that out. I'm trying to make this all much more real time. You're pulling this information in real time, and you're able to look at these in real time to see how they sort of play out. Really quickly, Philippe, will this webinar be available? I am recording it, so hopefully it's going to record as intended, so I will be posting it, Philippe. So, Maggie, could you have the possibility of looking at multiple show scenarios at the same time and just switch between outcomes? Yes, I think that kind of gets in that nesting structure there, that right now I'm just looking at an individual show, but you will be able to look at individual episodes or see how these all Jenga together on a larger facility level. I'm hoping to answer your question there, Maggie. Okay. Can you customize the notes? Yeah, eventually. We've actually been talking about that. It's down the road. Yes, you'll be able to actually custom things on there. There could be a little Godzilla head in here or whatever it is. Absolutely. So thanks, Kirsten. Appreciate that too. So kind of at 10 o'clock there right now. I'm just going to switch to one slide really quickly before folks kind of jet out. And it is some of the things that we have planned here too. So this is free for visual effects producers to use right now there. As you can see, there's still some stuff that in development. So we're looking for people that are sort of the early adopter type there that would like to be able to use it on their shows there. So that's free and available to use now on that one. Really, the big release is going to be in sort of mid-January. So that's what we're going to be targeting towards. So if you're interested in there, there's a form that you can sort of sign up for that one. At the same time, I am very interested in trying to get this into studios on a larger kind of capacity and starting to test some of those aggregation models where things can kind of come together. So if you're in a role at a studio where you have a little bit more sway in some of the technology there, I'd love to have that conversation. While I have lots of experience within a facility, it's a certain type of facility there, and I'm looking for different types of models, whether it's boutique or even large organizations, to make sure that we are building and answering the types of questions that folks have brought up here today. So feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn on there, and I'll be actively mentioning this again and again and again. But if you want to reach me, the website is whatifi.io. There's a VFX specific page in there. You can also email me at jcowley@whatifi.io. And there's also the form that I will repost here in the chat as well that you can fill out. And I am happy to stick around and answer any more nerdy specific questions about how the software works if anyone wants to dig deep. Sound good? All right. Anyone have any? Yeah, let's kind of dig into it. Anyone have any deep nerdy questions?
Well, maybe if you're talking about shot grid integration, I know this is sort of a work in progress, but
yeah,
how does this work as everybody's, where any organization that's heavily shot grid integrated has already allocated or spent a lot of resources on building out their shot grid integration. In the case of the company I was with, shot grid integration, Google Sheets integration, trying to get all of your actuals and stuff integrated into ShotGrid, and also all your personnel, into groups and your different offices and all of that stuff. So you don't want to be reinventing the wheel. And
exactly.
Yeah. And
so
how so are you using what are you using to talk to ShotGrid? Is it
So the philosophy of the software is, I know that it's a huge ask to expect someone to swap out the engine on their car right now, especially in an early stage product there too. So think of this instead as software that sits on top of your existing pipelines, as opposed to having to be integrated deep into that. So I'm more integrating with your workflow than expecting you to integrate with mine. So what does that mean? That means that you'll have like a ShotGrid integration event here. We'll have pre-built all of the mappings that are there. We will have imported from your ShotGrid all of your shows and all of your actuals. And I'm just pulling information from that ecosystem, as opposed to you having to integrate my software into that one. So something that sits on top of that workflow. We don't currently push anything back to there, and that's something that would be a custom integration because everyone does it a little bit differently.
I was going to say, is that live, or is that you're just importing, like you're doing one-off imports, or are you actually talking back and forth?
So I have two mechanisms. And in software development, what you usually do is you do the manual thing first, and you make sure the manual thing works really, really well, and then you do the basic of integration, and then you do the full API integration, right? So right now we've tested and we're working with the manual imports. So if someone has a default show, Big Buck Bunny or whatever it is, you can kind of pull that one in, and you can kind of get that into your system there. The end goal is full API integration. So when someone fills out their timesheets or does something on a Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, it's automatically pushed to our system there. And when you log in the morning and take a look, everything here is already in place. So really trying to have real-time dynamic imports that's pulling information into the system, as opposed to you having to manually go and do pulls. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, right, exactly. I was just going to say, like, for example, if Jane gets, resigns on Tuesday, and, you had her booked in for, a position on your project, is that going to get, do you have to like manually take care of that, or is that suddenly going to show up in your model and kind of go, hey, by the way, you no longer have your senior look dev,
The goal is absolutely for that all to be real time. It's going to take, there's be a couple of baby steps as we work our way towards all of that. The ultimate goal here is this is supposed to be a system that is cooking along beside you. On our roadmap, we have the ability to have trigger events in here. So you could set a threshold. Maybe I could use a goal event to create a threshold, much like I showed in the other scenario, that says, if my compositor capacity ever dips below -5 on this one, please send an email to the core management team. So if something was to change overnight, you would wake up in the morning and suddenly realize that 3 of your shows are now compromised, right? You can put in whatever trigger that you want to get these automatic notifications when a version of the model isn't playing out the way you want to. So it's really meant to be like a co-pilot at the end of the day.
That answers another of my questions, which was feedback and that sort of thing.
I think there was a question there about reports as well. So right now you can export anything out. So say, for example, I had, I had this kind of given model, and I've got two of these here right now. I can take this particular thread and I can export it out to a CSV file, and that should be sitting right here. And I can take a look at this. I've got numbers here linked, and I'm able to see now, on a capacity model, every single one of these accounts there, and I can look at it in this particular format. So that's sort of step one, just being able to have these exports that you can do whatever you want with. Having them as pre-formatted PDFs is the goal. It's a little tricky because the models are so highly customizable. It's not like you can kind of create a default PDF for some of these, but that is the goal, is allow you to have these sort of pre-cooked reports that you can set up in advance, and this information just funnels right into it. But as you can imagine, there's so much data that we have here available to you, so it really depends on how you want to customize that. So. Barry has a jump there. Is there any type of report generation? Yeah, I think that's that piece. Anything else I can answer?
Yeah, John. How long does that first integration mapping your whatifi to the shot grid schema? Because every studio has its own custom schema, right? They have their own specific fields. So how do you determine which? And some of those fields may be legacy fields, right? Like they might not even be relevant anymore. So the studio will have like thousands of fields, but they're only using like 100 of them, right? So how do you know which ones are relevant? Like how do you?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is I don't know. Right? It's going to be on a bit of a studio by studio basis. The idea is, and I think that's also why we're starting with like individual shows. We're sort of starting small and working our way up there. Is, as you kind of get these repeatable loops there, then you can sort of start to see them scale. So I imagine there's going to be, especially with a facility that has a larger entity structure there in ShotGrid, there's going to be some time getting all that set up. Much like a lot of other tools, once you create that initial mapping, that mapping sticks. So as long as there's conformity there, that's fantastic. Some facilities use sequences, some don't. Some use episodes, some don't. We have, it gets a little bit nerdy in here, but we have this thing called a custom account modal here, where you can go and pre-create all of the parallel sort of entities and records in our system, so you can have this sort of one-to-one. And when I'm either importing in from an Excel doc, like, so for example, say I'm trying to do this Godzilla build here and I've never used the software before. The very first setup pass is I do have to kind of go into that architecture and create the employee account structure. So this is going to be, what's the best way of doing this one? So I would have to kind of go and find my employees, and I would have to create an artist sub account, and I would have to create my departments, right, like tracking. And then I can go in here and I can create juniors and seniors and intermediates. So there's a first order version where that has to happen. But once that's built, then that's built, right? And these are all designed to map back to whatever sort of structure you have either in your bid document, because sometimes what's in a bid document for departments and sometimes what's in the show level are different. The thesis I have here, and keep in mind this is 80-20, this is meant to be napkin math, is I am trying to figure out how many CG generalists I need versus very specific sort of sub-departments that are in there if I'm a facility that kind of works with a generalist mentality. If I'm looking at very specific requirements like, CFX or a particular type, water sim, then you can also get granular on that level. And I'm not sure if I answered your question well, but that's the idea, is you pre-build these, you have those mappings, and then those mappings will just automatically update through the ShotGrid integration. We're early into that one, like we have the proof of concept. I'm sure there's going to be some surprises, and that's a little bit of why I'm looking for those early partner companies so that we can kind of co-build and find some of those edge case uses. We also have, as part of our sort of founding team, folks that actually have worked for ShotGrid there as well, so they're fairly involved in helping us pre-plan that. Sound good? Derek, you're asking about hardware resources, if you have 100 workstations. Yeah, so same sort of idea there. It is all just math, right? So if I'm keeping track of how many employees that I have of a particular type, I can have dependent calculations downstream of that. I don't have any examples of that one, but it is all just math. So if someone has 100 workstations, But we're basically talking about constraints, right? So I have, for example, in our architecture, a constraint event, all right? And a constraint event would allow me to put a constraint on any particular account. Maybe I can't go above and beyond. I've only got so many compositor type workstations. It's all fine to say that I'm going to need 1,000 compositors, but my constraint is 100, and you can build those constraints into the system there at the same time. Eventually, and honestly, this is going to be a little further down the line there, maybe early summer or late summer there, you'll be able to kind of get into a world where we'll have solvers in our architecture. And what that means is it can go through and run through your models, multiple models, and create one additional model that is your best fit. So maybe you have 14 shows on the go and there's all this sort of variability there. What is the right ratio of work to happen in the London office versus the Mumbai office versus the Vancouver office? What is the right amount of this, and this that fills in all the blanks, that maximizes some value, whether that is profit, whether that is minimizing overtime, all of those sort of things there. So that's where we start getting some of our artificial intelligence work that we're doing there. Right now, this requires someone to say, well, what if I do A and what if I do B? The ultimate goal is a system that comes back and says, have you thought about C? And this is what C looks like, right? Really a co-pilot that's running alongside there. There's a lot of ifs in that one, but we've already done our proof of concepts there. And it's going to be pretty powerful, just the ability for the model to inform some of the values that are there, as opposed to the exercise of human people trying to figure out all the different kind of combinations of outcomes. Sound cool? I say Rukin there's got O. I assume you're saying oh yes to that. Yes, agree if that's why one of the important ifs is do we have enough resources on one of those ifs exactly there. So the goal is to be able to see all the different versions of the future there and look for patterns in the data just in case. And Rukin saying overhead. Yeah, overhead can all be factored into this as well. I haven't really tested that one to see just because it's math. I've been focusing mostly on capacity, but you could be looking at things like, supervisors, coordinators, all of that can be factored into the model. I'm picking a small little slice right now and trying to solve one problem really, really, really well, and then we sort of expand upon that one. And I think artist capacity is kind of the big nugget there that most people are struggling with is, do I have the right amount of people at the right time to get the work done? Ultimately our goal is to deliver work on time and on budget there. I think capacity is really the biggest driver behind all that.
On that note, are you able to do partial capacity or partial allocation? So like production staff or PMs and stuff like that, or people that are working on multiple shows at once, can you do like they can do like 50% allocation for a specific department, then knowing that they're going to be doing like double time kind of an idea, or like not double time, like
the answer is going to be yes-ish. I haven't sort of factored that into some of the core build that's here, but it is all just math. So I think that's part of what I'm looking for when producers are using this initially is what are some of the, I don't even want to call them edge cases, but what are some of the extended uses they're looking for, right? So, for example, here right now, this is just a singular model. I'm pulling in what's available to me. But if that person is, assigned 50% of the time on other sort of shows, that's where the shot grid integration kind of comes in. So keep in mind, I'm working with round numbers here too. So while I can sit there and say, is Bill assigned to this show? I'm really approaching it more is how many trackers, how many compositors are available to the show, knowing that things are constantly moving around, especially in an episodic environment there too. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question well there, Rosen, but it's both high level from the top, really quick napkin math. Do we in theory have the capacity? And then from the bottom, who is actually on the show and when do they start, when do they end there, and how does that impact the model at the same time?
Cool. Yep, no, that answers it. And I think I saw where you had over allocated a certain department, so you've gone to like 90% for like 6 weeks or something like that. And I wasn't sure if there's a way of going like under, so you can do like 50% or something like that. Or
so you can actually set up. I'll do a quick one there. There's a couple of things, and again, this is a simple version of the model here, so I'm trying to keep it basically. You can look at something really high level here, and because this is just a single model, like am I staffed properly. I mean, right now I've only got 45, 46, 43% of what I need, because this is just, I'm almost looking at a facility model, what the facility has, and I'm looking at a show. I'm obviously way overstaffed here. But when I get into the meat of the show, this is a conversation with production management. It's like, hey guys, you've really only allocated 45% of what I need to be able to pull the show off on time. So that's the idea there. I'm trying to give folks visibility and transparency and the data they need to have the tough conversations they need to have. Whether that's a tough conversation with a client, whether it's a tough conversation with a supervisor, or whether that's a tough conversation with production management and the rest of the facility. It's just arming you with information to know your show. Make sense?
No, this is perfect. Yeah, because I did find that most of the time my issues were, I could see that there was problems going to be coming up, but how do I prove it to people up further and let them know what the actual cost is going to be to them if I don't get what I need?
There you go. I'm going to share this scenario, and management can see. This is a unique view from me, but you're able to share a scenario with other people there, and they can watch that scenario and they can see what it looks like. So this is sort of step one in that nested structure, but ultimately they'll be able to insert your model into this larger model, and they can see how multiple shows are all playing together at the same time as everyone sort of jockeys. My thesis is still that I think half of the problems you can get ahead on from better pre-planning, so that when you do get into the triage scenarios, you're actually into less of them and the footprint is smaller. There's always going to be 911 stuff and there's always going to be triage, but I think we can get ahead of that with better pre-planning on shows. Cool. Philippe, does the platform include a feature to incorporate holidays? We haven't put that in yet, but that's absolutely going to be required. Right now, for example, in our capacity module here, we are, pre-assuming right now, 8-hour days, 5-day weeks, all of this particular piece. But we certainly want to add more functionality in here too. So maybe your facility assumes a 10-hour day for some reason, or different sort of metrics to divide up the bid days and how many people are going to be required to do that. Being able to understand, where the holidays are, different locations, all of that will be future versions of things when I kind of get into that location-based piece. So right now it is still a little bit more napkin math. Are we in the zone of having enough people? I want to know if we are 12 compositors short for our final delivery or one compositor short, because we know we'll figure out the one piece there. It's the 12 that will be tricky. How do you handle outsourcing in your models currently? I haven't put anything in specifically to do that, but it would be pretty easy to do, right? So let me think how I would want to do that one. I would maybe, let's kind of play with this model on the fly. I would maybe be talking to, maybe Rotomaker or Track or Basilic Fly has resources available there. I've reached out to them and they're like, yeah, I can help you with your tracking. So we can give you, let's just sort of say here, let's add an employee event in and let's call this outsource. And I know that I'm looking at having Basilic Fly do some stuff here. This is going to be, I'm just going to fill some things in here. They tell me that they can allocate 10 trackers to help me. They're available from March 1st to June 24th that are there. Whether we get into rates or not, I'm just going to throw this stuff in here just to be sort of simple. So I've got this information in my system, and I know that this is going to get allocated towards tracking, right? And I'm missing one field. This is going to be, let's just say this is in Mumbai there. So I've now put in a placeholder here. So keep in mind, this is, because we built this so modular, you can also hijack some of these things to make them do something, right? So did I design it for outsource? No, but I can, if I understand it, I can hijack it to make it do just about anything I need it to. So now I've inserted in that outsource resource here too on that one. So now if I look at my available trackers here, right, I can look at tracking now, and now I have access to my tracking, and I can also look at my capacity and look at my tracking capacity here too. So now I see that my tracking capacity, I've got more than enough, you know what I mean? So they can help me sort of sort that out. If I don't have those guys, I'm going to bypass that temporarily. We can see I'm actually hooped, right? So here I've got my challenges. I'm actually shy on that. So maybe I am trying to surge on tracking, whether it's attempt delivery, or just trying to feed other sort of departments there. I've now forced in a scenario where I have that. And if I wanted to, I could have two scenarios here. I'm just going to do this really quickly. Super nerding out. If I'm trying to sit there with production management and I want to show them what my options are, here's my outsourcing tracking. And here, and I realize this is sort of pro stuff already, here is one where I'm doing nothing, okay? And I am connecting this back into the rest of my flow. And you'll see in a second here, I'm going to have 4 models now, right? One with the outsource, one without the outsource, and I'm able to look at all of my different scenarios here now and see one with the outsource, what things look like. And keep in mind, I'm also modeling out at the same time what happens if one of my episodes pushes out by 4 months. So that's what I'm seeing here right now is all of that data. And I can look at it a couple different ways. I can look at it, from a capacity point of view here, and now I'm looking at tracking, for example. I want to level too deep. Tracking, and I can see in this one model, how things look like, in this model, how things look like, right? And looking for these hot spots where I'm in trouble or where I'm not in trouble. Just a way of being able to look at things. David says, perfect. I'll take it, David. Perfect's great.
So John, really quick.
Yep.
So basically what you did for the outsource is you treated it as an employee, like a contract employee.
Yeah.
So you don't really need to think of outsource as its own special type of entity. It's just more of a rearrangement of the way you consider employees, right?
Yeah, it's like I keep kind of going back to like Nuke or Houdini, having been an artist myself there too. There's always more than one way of doing things if you understand how those sort of primitives work in the software. So, full transparency, there is a learning curve to some of my tech here too, especially if you spend all your life in Excel. I would argue that if you'd never touched Excel and you never touched this, and I throw both down in front of you, I think I'd get you there sooner, right? But everyone's sort of used to thinking Excel type logic. But yes, there's more than one way of doing things, and when you understand how data flows through all of this, then it's really easy to kind of reach inside the matrix and change what some of the data is doing. So could we build an outsource event and put this in here and it's sort of bespoke outsourcing? Absolutely. It would really be almost a skin on what an employee event is there. One of the things we have planned longer term is like an SDK for the software, so that if you're inside a facility, you have my pre-baked, 30 events that we've built here. But if you want to go and build your own one there that is, cannibalizing some of the logic that we have and customizing it for whatever reason, we'll give you that flexibility to build your own events in our logic. And eventually I have a model, and these are a lot of sort of startup blue sky things, where much like people might share, Nuke script and widgets and snippets online, people will be able to share these little blocks in some of our form. Like, hey, I built a really cool outsource event. Cool, can I have it? Yeah, just download this piece and drop it in. That's the end goal.
Well, the reason why I'm bringing it up is like they're both valid, right? To treat it as a separate, unique outsource event, but I'm also of the opinion like outsource technically isn't a special event. It is just another person that you're assigning it to who just doesn't live in your studio.
True. But you might get into some things where you want to, so for example, here I put this under employment expenses. And again, this is me already kind of going off the rails. I'd have to change this, but right now I gatekeep where you can assign that to, but there's nothing preventing us from opening this up. So you could now actually assign this to outsource, right? So if you're sitting in a meeting and someone's like, well, how much are we spending on outsource every month? It's like, well, here you go, right? In this particular model, if you guys don't hire me those trackers, I'm going to have to outsource, and I'm going to have to do $300,000 with Basilic Fly in our model there. So now you can start to not get into, do I also have the capacity, but what is the financial ramification?
Sure. Well, I think that could also be like a tag or something, or a sub metadata. Like this is an outsourced company, and then you parse that one field instead of creating an entire entity for it.
Yeah, and that's one of the arts to software development. And anyone who's actually spent time in sort of legacy shot grid there, you can throw a lot of things in there and regret those later, or you can try to keep it as simple as possible and as basic as possible. So kind of to my point, I didn't build this software exclusively for visual effects. So an employee event is designed to be generic, right,
Yep.
and modular here. So a construction company could do the same thing, or
Absolutely.
a bricks and mortar store could do the same sort of thing here. So I'm trying to keep them really, really generalized, but I can see the use case where people are going to want to be able to like skin them for their teams, so they're much more intuitive. You know?
Yep.
So.
That makes sense.
Sweet, sweet. Is there a way to build in levels privilege so different people see different levels or shareable with client? Yeah, that's so we're going through a little bit of a technical rewrite behind the hood there to get into a more of a permissions-based system, right? As you can imagine, depending on which facility you're at, a producer may or may not be privy to how much artists cost, right? If a company is thinking, management is, sadly thinking about doing layoffs, they should be able to operate in a scenario where they're thinking about making some changes and the production teams aren't seeing that information there until such time as they choose to sort of share. So very much a nested permissions type system. Permissions are going to allow certain people to see certain scenarios, especially when you kind of get all the way up into the C-suite on things. And one of the things, and we haven't quite figured out how we're going to do it, but we also need to give permissions on what people can actually edit. So much like a Google Doc, you might be able to see someone else's scenario, but you can't touch it. But maybe I want you to be able to kind of come in and be able to like change something in one event or the other. The other thing we're working on, and I should have had it prepped up in advance, is a dashboard. So while this is really the guts of the model, right? There's a dashboard view where I'm just showing charts and tables and widgets for each of these scenarios there so that you're not trying to sit there and teach someone who's following along, what all this means. People just want to know what the results are and what the goals are, right? So being able to have this dashboard view where you're able to see, am I overstaffed or understaffed in compositing? That's all you really need. And I need to be able to see that in a dashboard. I don't need to be able to see the spaghetti that actually created the model. So, do you have different views for data entry, for example? Yeah, so I'm going to nerd out again here, David. This is something I'm actually pretty stoked about. I've already spent some time. So here's the challenge. You have to enter information in. So you're either integrating in through an API, you're having something in a Google Sheet where you change a value from 5 to 6 and it automatically syncs into our architecture. That's one way of getting information into the system there, right? The piece that I'm actually super excited about is conversational build. So I've already been able to use some ChatGPT AI assistants there to be able to conversationally model out some scenarios and have it build the model in our ecosystem at the same time there too. So instead of someone having to go and drop an employee event and fill all the things, I would love to be able to, and I know that we can do it, be able to say, I think we're going to have to outsource some work to Basilic Fly, right? And I was like, cool. Do you want me to add in an outsource, employee event to it? Yep. Let's look at starting, Q2 of 2024, and it will infer all of the data and drop that information in. I think that's going to be a pretty interesting way of getting information to the system. And if you want to get really, really nerdy at some stage there too, I'm sure there's ways of actually integrating in with Basilic Fly. And if they want to be able to share a certain level of capacity or information with you, that can also trickle into your system there too. So much more like a networked answer to things. Did that answer your question, David, or did I miss the point?
I guess what I was saying is, like, for example, if there's a project that I'm building out, but say it's still very speculative, it's not in shot grid, but I want to show stuff to management, for example, but I don't necessarily have the time to do a full mock-up, but I've got, say, a coordinator or an AP that I can task with, inputting, like, 26 episodes, and a bunch of different events and stuff like that. But I want to be able to do that quickly. Is there like some sort of interface that allows them to just kind of go bang, bang, bang and throw in a bunch of stuff, or even import CSV files, et cetera? You know what I'm talking about.
So that's exactly what's happening here. So this information is sort of manually entered in, kind of quick and dirty. This is, and now I built this pre-demoed it to make things sort of simple, but we have an importer right now. So what do you have when you're bidding? You have speculative work. You have work that's getting more and more realistic. You have work that you bid, and you have work that you've been awarded. Right. So we have a concept there that'll be part of a future versions of the software of states. Right. So this entire bundle can have a state. And I am getting pretty deep here with this kind of conceptually, but this particular project can have a state. So you can say this is speculative work. You can say that this is prospect. You can say that this is in bidding or whatever it is, and you're able to sort of see that and do filters. So I want to be able to look at everything that is awarded plus everything that's in bidding. So you'll be able to do some sort of filtering at that particular piece. I don't want you to have to kind of go and fully do out a bid though. So at the same time, you could also just do a placeholder, right? So you can kind of come in and just say, I think I got a great relationship with the client. We worked on Orphan Black season 1. So I got a great relationship with the client. I think we could probably get $200,000 an episode of work on season 2. It is a comp-centric show, so I'm going to do some napkin math and say that it is this much this, this much this, this much this. Let's drop those placeholders in and just see what it looks like, right? I want you to be able to do that quick math as opposed to having to go super, super granular. And then the idea is you can swap out information when it becomes real. So you could have your placeholder napkin math bid, and then when you actually get the bid pack in and it's actually $300,000 worth of work, you swap in that information instead. That makes sense, David?
Yep. No, that's great. That's really even more than that's more sort of much higher level conceptual stuff that is really great to know. I was actually just looking more like very simply for data entry stuff without handing a subordinate sort of the keys to the kingdom in your what if layouts or whatever. If there was some sort of simplified data entry sort of interface that they could use to do stuff without necessarily messing up. For example, if I've got some of these set up, but I just need more data input into the thing without having them necessarily mess with my, with all my states and all my stuff like that. If there's just a place where they can just go and throw in a bunch of data.
I've got a couple of different ways, and I'd love to kind of carry on that conversation, understand, a bit more of the specifics. But, for example, here, if you need to add more employees in, I give you the ability to kind of come in and edit some things in this particular piece, right? I don't know if this is going to show up properly. Yeah, so here's my trackers here right now, right? If I want to add some more information into, I give you lots of different ways of inserting stuff in. My ultimate goal is to make it less and less manual, right? That's where some of the conversational piece comes in there. And, a model is only good as the information that's in it. So it's about trying to make that as easy and as manageable as possible. Make sense?
Thanks.
Cool. Anything else? We've got a few other people that are hanging out here. Any other questions I can answer?
You might have just answered it as part of David's question, but is there a way of doing like a preset package kind of an idea? So it's like, we know usually if it's about 100 shots, it's going to be this many people, this many things. Is there a way of having that almost like done previously that you can just drag and drop into a scenario and be like just starting to get the bid out, we don't have too many details, so I'm just going to make this assumption that's kind of already put together, or you can already personally put it together that you can drop in later?
You're thinking like a producer, Rosen. Which is fantastic. So we've already built this. We're kind of reworking it a little bit right now, but it's this concept of instancing. So anyone who's got, as a CG supervisor, that term instancing is you go and you build something and you put a whole bunch of points out there and you're basically copying and pasting that instance all over the place. So the same idea, and keep in mind, this isn't live yet, but this concept here of having a container now means I have a bundled bunch of information that all have a relationship, right? So say that, I could say that this is $100,000 worth of work. This is what I'm going to need. These are some of the additional expenses. I've kind of created a unit there. And then I can very easily, it's called an instance event, and I can say I want one of these starting in January, I want 2 of these starting in February, and I want 6 starting in March. So keep in mind in here, there's already dollar values and dates and ranges there. So that entire package gets more or less copied and pasted to January. You've got 2 copy and pastes to February, and you've got 4 copy and pastes to July, and all that information goes along for the ride. And then if you want to, because you still have the source package there that you are copying and pasting. It has a live link to it. So if I go back and later on and I change this from $5 to $6 and this from 2 to 3, all of those downstream instances inherit that information. That make sense?
Yeah, and actually on that too, and sorry, I know if other people have other questions.
It's okay, it's okay. I'll take it.
Geeking out now because this is the kind of stuff that like interests me. If we wanted to take so we've got this model, we ran through it, and then I have almost like a after the show, like almost like a post-mortem of like, this is what we wanted to happen, this is what actually happened, and being able to compare both of them, because I do find that I've been at a lot of studios where they make the same mistakes over and over and over again, but we're not able to kind of learn from it and to be able to be like, like if we made this adjustment earlier, or like this is where we went off track, and we can see that it's kind of happens very often. How can we make sure that the next scenario we build incorporates that kind of information into it?
Yeah. I love that idea. I haven't thought super deep on that one, so I'm going to do this one on the fly. We keep track of historicals, right? So I'm thinking about like some of the stuff, for example, we pull in data from like QuickBooks and Xero on an accounting sort of front. So we can see, how did January look? How did February look? How did March look? How did April look? And you have all those sort of historicals. Same sort of thing here. Because you have ShotGrid, right? You can pull in your historicals on what you've utilized along the way, right? So you do have that. So you'd be able to sort of snapshot and say, I needed this, 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 and this, and I got this, 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 and this, and the show went off the rails. I wonder why, right? So you'd be able to see some of those patterns in the data. So it's all about what do we capture and keep track of. It's also a philosophy of how you use the software, right? So in my mind, once you publish a bid, that bid should never be touched. It should be change orders or new iterations of the bid. So as long as you are not messing with this data, right, there, and you're treating it as a single source of truth, you have what you said you needed. And with the ShotGrid integration, you'll have what you actually used on a project, episode basis there. I think you have everything you need to be able to track all of that. I'm sort of saying that out loud there, but yeah, I think you would have all of that there and we'd be able to do that. So, yes.
But if everything updates automatically from ShotGrid, will the software know what that ShotGrid information was at the time this was built? So like if your crew dropped to 5, but when we created this, we had 10, when you go back into this, does it automatically upgrade the crew to 5, or does it know that when this was built, it was 10?
It's all about time tracking, right? So, and not everyone uses ShotGrid's native time tracking in there too. So that's going to be potentially one of the wrinkles in there. So shot assignments change all the time in ShotGrid, as we know. Bill's supposed to do this, and then Bill didn't get a chance. He was on instead. But the timesheet is really that single source of truth. So you would know that Bill spent 5 days on, on episode 201 last week, and that Sue did 2 days this week. So you actually have that historical information of what actually got done, as opposed to what was supposed to kind of get done. So I think that's where you have your answer there, Ozen, is that as long as the time tracking is actually happening there, you have the historical information there to be able to sort of see how things played out, right?
Okay, so like the crew size being like 5 compositors and was 10, it'll show that when this was built, it was 10.
Yep. So I think you'd be able to kind of sit there, and as I don't have an example, I did a little bit of because we're still working on it. I have a let me sort of see if this is going to show you. I'm already kind of going into the guts. So here is where. And this is what ShotGrid will do. So I have manually, so picture this being an automated process. Right now, this is the manual process. I have manually gone in here right now and said that for compositors needed, right, on this particular body of work, we actually got 4 in December, 18 in January, 12 in February, 9 and 6. So these are things that I've manually entered in, but this is what I'm planning on pulling from ShotGrid instead to have in here. So this is getting auto-populated. And the way ShotGrid works, now it's a little tricky because sometimes people don't fill out their timesheets until just in time for payroll, so things are sort of changing. But these will and should be non-changing in ShotGrid. Now, the month at hand is always going to be a little bit fluid, and the week at hand is always a little bit fluid. But this is historical stuff, no different than how much you spent on, facility toilet paper at, this office. You've got that math there. And then it's really just how things play out in the future. So if you said that you needed 26 people here and you got 18, and you said you needed 26 here and you got 12, because I'm able to keep track of what you said you were going to need, right? Because you said you were going to need, and I know I'm clicking around here madly for folks. You said you were going to need, this is what I said I was going to need, right? And this is what you actually used up. I don't have it turned on right now. And this is the difference between those two. You would have all the information you need to be able to do that audit. So I'm going to sort of say that back to you. Like, why did that show go so poorly? It's like, well, I told you I needed this, this, and this upstream because, you know, if we don't get all of our tracking done, I can't get these things into layout in time. And you can kind of see where some of those bottlenecks are. So I think there's a long answer to the question. I think the answer is yes.
No, that's perfect. It was more about making sure that, because I've had it before where something automatically updates, which overrides data that was in there that was older, but because this keeps it by date and not by currently how many people there are at that specific time, then it will track properly is what I'm thinking. So
that's why the shot grid integration is such an important part to us there. And that's why I have a little asterisk when I said what's going to be live in January there. I think it's going to be a basic implementation, but we're going to keep adding more and more to it. It's also going to require, and that's going to be a little bit more tricky, you can export from shot grid the information you need to if you need to kind of put it in. As an individual producer, you know, having our tech integrated in with ShotGrid to pull information is something you're going to have to go up the stack within the facility there too. And there's going to be some initial resistance to that one there. My hope is very much that you have enough people that are all trying to use this that we can, together, we can convince management about the benefits of having that integration in there. So, right. Cool. We still got a few folks kicking around. Any other questions I can answer? Maybe I got a question there too. As a software founder, I'm always trying to figure out, am I bringing a gun to a knife fight? Am I building something that's overpowered for the problem? Is it a big enough problem that there are kind of requirements for? Or do the existing tools do things perfectly fine? I know that's a very open-ended, soft, fuzzy question there, but is this potentially solving a big enough problem?
I'm going to say yes. I don't want to speak for everybody here, but being someone who's used ShotGrid for years and years and years, almost from it coming out, and as well as using like F-Track and other software, one of the things it doesn't really allow you to do is forecast scenarios. When you put it in there, it kind of like sets it in there. So it's like needing more people or whatever else, you're not able to really put scenarios together, where this really gives that option of here are different options and different scenarios to kind of see where it comes out to. I've also been at studios where producers aren't able to see crew costs, and you have to kind of sit with accounting and be like, here's a scenario, what's the total cost? Here's a scenario, what's the total cost? Where I feel like if you are able to hide some of that cost, but still play around with the crew size, numbers, dates, and everything like that, then a producer can easily go in and be like, okay, if I preload this department or preload that department, what is it? What does the total cost end up being? And am I saving money or not saving money? So this is beautiful. I wish I had it years ago.
Did I? I'm not sure if I mentioned, because it had been a dry run where I was practicing my whole pitch, so I can't remember if I actually mentioned it. Did I mention that we're going to do artist weightings as well? Did I mention that?
You put down the percentage like overload and stuff like that, but weightings as in like their
weightings is so the other challenge that we all sort of see is like, hey, you've got 10 compositors, what's the problem? It's like, well, I've got 10 juniors, right? So part of version 2 of this one is we're going to give folks the ability to on a department by department, role by role, and probably eventually on an individual basis, if that's people are asking for, is to say, well, you know, if an intermediate is a 1, because most people are bidding for an intermediate to do a particular body of work, let's assume a junior is a 0.6, and let's assume that a senior is a 1.7 or a 1.6 or something like that. So it's not just to say that you've got 10 people on it. What is the weighting? Because 10 people could really be 6, or 10 people could be 14, depending on the mix of people that are actually available to that particular show. So I think that's an important thing I want to sort of factor in there as well, is that weighting capacity.
John, you're going to be getting into some very controversial topic. That's a very controversial topic. But to help mitigate that, I think your software is going to need to have the ability to customize the definitions of what that weighting is per studio.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the hands down. I even say we can do it per role in department, right? So
Yes,
yeah,
correct.
role. So maybe some departments it's not as precious as that one. So that's a user driven piece. I'm not the one sort of setting that one up. You would be able to kind of go in and say. Some people even asked it to be like on a per artist per sort of skill set thing. I think that's getting too granular. Personally, on that one. Part of what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to move quickly and agile and nimbly here. But it's all just math. It can all roll up there to a degree.
I'd like to comment about your question also regarding are you bringing a gun to a knife fight?
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I've been searching for in VFX is more visually digestible software, right?
Yeah.
I've been using ShotGrid for more than a decade now, and just overseeing my department, and I've just started learning about the dashboards like graphs and stuff in ShotGrid. That is once you've turned into a graph, I feel like you can convince producers and management what the scenario is. Like when they
Yeah.
see a graph, it feels a lot more. It has a lot more weight to it, and having a visual tool like this to demonstrate or to illustrate what scenarios you're about to hit is an incredibly powerful tool to influence decision making. So
They can't argue like this is problem, right? But if
exactly,
you're
yeah,
over here, it's like what's the problem?
exactly,
Right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, my kudos on this, and yeah, the second part of this is that you're gonna have to get people to adopt this,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are so used to what you were the spreadsheet mindset, and it's a very not nimble mindset. When you're looking at a spreadsheet, you don't know how to move nimbly in these dynamic VFX economies and production. So having this that is interactive is a useful tool for again making decisions and visualizing
Nice.
decisions.
Cool. And then it's certainly one of the challenges there is that there's in software nowadays everyone expects to be able to just pop it open, never read a manual, and just kind of get right into it. So I don't think it's going to be
Correct.
quite that simple. And I think part of my workflow, and that's why I'm trying to get it into the hands of some people there and work with them. Templates will be part of it to make it easier, so that you're able to kind of pull something in that's pre-built and you're just filling some things in and being able to figure that out. And I'd argue much like Nuke or Houdini, there's that initial sort of like, what am I looking at? But once you start to wrap your head around the concepts, at least when I was doing effects work, I never opened the manual again in Houdini. You just kind of understood how the logic is, and it becomes easier and easier to build things out. That's the hope.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of it is me just surfing alongside with folks there and being available as they start to build out individual shows first, and I can also figure out what some of the other features are that people would like to see in that one. And then we're also going through a UI redesign as well too that'll make it more and more intuitive as well, so that just easier and easier to understand what's actually happening. But yeah, I appreciate.
One more
Yeah,
question. So you're planning on making this industry agnostic, right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Very cool.
yeah. It's I obviously have the sort of connections in the visual effects space. So it's a good place for me to kind of go to first to try to validate the technology. Two, because our industry is used to this node-based type of workflow there, that it's more familiar than if I just to drop into a construction company or something else that's such a big departure from something they're used to. So I think
Hmm.
I'm going to have less of a challenge getting people to appreciate the value of a node-based workflow on
Yeah,
things.
I was wondering about that, but I don't know. I mean, I know that in project management outside of the visual effects industry, a lot of people use software that uses sort of arborescent kind of structures, which is kind of reminiscent of node-based work.
Yep,
But
yep. Yeah,
but I
and yeah,
mean,
you're right. Yeah, whether they're using like like there's lucid charts and there's things like even Miro has this to a degree,
yeah,
but they
and
don't
people who are
calculate
kind
right.
of in our industry, unfortunately, to some degree, I mean, we've all kind of been molded, and I would even say warped in a way by ShotGrid and all of its limitations, specifically when it comes to timeline management. I just find I constantly, want to yell at it very loudly. And if and well, I'm somebody who has an artist background and an editor background, so I'm always looking for stuff that's more timeline or node based, which is what attracts me to this.
Yep.
I know a lot of my colleagues are, spreadsheet wonks, and so this would be a steep learning curve for them. So that's something I guess you have to keep in mind.
Yep.
When you're selling,
capture a few. You get a few people, and in startup lore, you've got to try and do something 5 to 10 times better there before people will sort of switch on things. So you have to figure out what those pieces are. So a lot of what I'm doing here, you could do in a spreadsheet, especially if you're a power user. But once the number of permutations explodes, that's kind of really where I shine in that one. On that one. So it's sort of finding what is the piece that opens it up where people are like, okay, it's worth kind of learning how to do this as a result. So those would be some of my challenges. You also, in Startup 101, you're not trying to capture everybody. You're trying to capture that early adopter group of people. They need to be data driven. They need to have been burnt once or twice by the process already there. And it's also psychology too. So the current systems are absolute, and people will have to spend a bunch of time deciding whether something is going to be this number or this number, right? And you're committing to this number, and everyone's watching you commit to this number. You're in a meeting, and it's going to be 5 or it's going to be 10. I think the psychology here is the idea that instead you can have lots of different things there. It's more of a whiteboard, sketchy type of version to things. Sketchy not as in untrustworthy, but sketchy as in like napkin map sort of thing where you can blue sky what's possible. There's even a version of the UI that I make this whole thing look more like a whiteboard, but it's almost a little too unprofessional on that one. But that kind of concept. And then if you're not feeling like you are putting in a number that you are going to be judged by, then it's much easier to put in a couple of different scenarios. And then back to my point, instead look at the trend in the data, right? And sort of see what does the trend say as opposed to just the single model. Like, are you sure that's the case? That's what the client's telling me. But then if I see multiple things, like in all versions of the future, we are in trouble on compositing. Sorry, guys, you need to think about hiring some more compositors or something like that. That's the goal. Right?
Is there you mentioned capacity? Is there a capacity of how many people can be using the software at any given time?
I think I can build that in with my constraints there. So they're all kind of dependent calculations, right? So I could put a constraint in there and say this can only be X, and then it kind of creates a flag if it kind of goes above and beyond that. So the answer is yes-ish, but I'd have to think a little bit more about that one. So what do you want to do with that information there?
Like if you're having a meeting like this or something like that, and there's like 10 of us, or like, let's say it's been used studio-wide, and every producer has their own project as like a what-if scenario in there, and they're all using it at exactly the same time. Is there lag? Is there
in the software itself?
In the software itself, like is there a capacity for software itself?
No. So what we're doing right now, there's a lot of stuff that happens in your browser here, calculation-wise. We're moving more and more and more of that to AWS. So that would mean absolutely not. It's going to be ridiculous how much horsepower there is. So people are kind of playing around with different parts of the system there. There won't be any lag in there. One of the things we need to kind of solve or decide is, is there a world where I let, 3 people all be editing the same scenario at the same time there too? Is it like some software where 3 or 4 people could be watching this, but one person has control over that? I think we'll probably head that direction first, mostly because, and hope you can appreciate, there is a cubic ton of information that's going back and forth to AWS and calculating on the fly here every single time I make a change on that one. So I want to make sure that data integrity is super precious. So I'm not really worried about speed or capacity. I just want to make sure data doesn't get lost along the way. That's your question.
I know that like Excel usually does where you check it out and then check it back in kind of a scenario. So
I want to try to avoid that to a degree, because then you start getting copies and copies of things there. You start to kind of get fragmentation of that one. So I really do want it to be a dynamic live environment in there too. Some of it can kind of get into, if I make a change to this, am I changing this or am I changing all of this? The calculation is changing all that, but if you're editing this and someone is editing this, the ability for those all to be happening concurrently, but not conflicting. And that's really a software engineering challenge there too. And I have to decide whether that's a big enough nut to crack. So we'll figure that one out.
Awesome. Thanks.
Philippe asked, personally, I believe determining the need of senior junior roles should involve collaboration with supervisors and nuanced understanding of the team's requirements. Yeah, I agree with that one. That's a philosophical piece there, and I've been on all sides of that one. Myself there as a head of studio, I see certain parts of that one there too. I've seen systems where every individual, so keep in mind there's two things. I've seen systems where every individual in a company there at some stage, supervisors get together and they're like, they can get granular and say that person's great at keying, but they're lousy at all CG comps, right? You can kind of get to that level of sort of granularity there too. Or you can be a little bit more napkin math, where it's like, yeah, that person is, a senior compositor, but they really should be an intermediate. I know it says senior on paper, but really they're an intermediate. So you can kind of get granular and kind of sort of have a piece to that one there as well. Part of this, though, is also future planning as well. So while I have in individual people, right? So here's my current employees, right? And here's Bill and Ted and Sue there. Part of this is also future hires, right? I'm going to need 15 more compositors, and I don't know who they are. They're going to be hires that are there. So there I might be able to say, well, market's really tough right now. All you can get is juniors. Well, let's plug in 15 juniors. I was like, well, that doesn't quite solve my problem. Maybe I need to ramp that up to 20 juniors instead if I want to hit my capacity threshold. So being able to mix and match actuals on real folks there and their skills and talents and future forecasts on potential hires to solve capacity. I think both those systems need to live at the same time, but that's one person's opinion.
Yeah, one more thing on that, and I feel that this is a mistake a lot of studios make, but I don't think it's something you can solve, John, is that having a bunch of juniors actually takes up the time of one of your seniors as well as one of your leads. It doesn't just having them does not evaluate the time needed. It actually takes the time up of someone that's more senior to be able to help those people out as well, which I think that's just a studio thing that I think production people and people need to know and leads need to know.
But there's, again, it's all math there too. I think we can kind of get a world where there is ratios in there as well. So I haven't gone into this part of it. At this stage, I've thought about just everything. I haven't necessarily implemented everything there too, but I do have the ability to do some sort of expression formula-based calculations in here as well. So there's nothing preventing us from having a ratio of juniors to something, right? So for every 10 juniors or 15 juniors or 20 juniors, we need to add X, right? Or something like that. It is all just math, right? You'd be able to sort of see what that looks like over time there, and where is that threshold? Where are we dipping below or above that particular threshold? It's all great. We can hire 100 juniors to start next week, right? But what does it actually mean practically, right? And that's all possible. I'd argue that's the dream scenario where people are going to that level of granularity with my software. That would be wicked, but it's math. It's doable. All right, that's the 2-hour mark. A few folks around there too. Anything else? I'm just curious for anyone else there too. I know there's a level of complexity and anything is possible, which is both powerful. Is capacity planning a challenge for anyone else that's still kind of kicking around the call?
Can you be more specific on what you mean?
Are people finding that the current tools and sort of doing this by gut instinct and spreadsheets, is it working most of the time? Or is it sort of fundamentally a system that's not working, but there's just no better way of doing it?
I'm going to say emphatically not. No, that's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to this sort of thing. I mean, it's in my opinion, in my experience. Anyways, I mean, maybe I've been in the wrong companies, but in my experience, it never works. You try your best, you do all sorts of things. You end up, you always end up in a situation where you're either panicking, you're doing a lot of Peter and what I call a lot of Peter and Paul stuff, where you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yep.
And you're gonna regret it, or somebody's gonna regret it if it's not you. If you're not on the receiving end of that, where you're kind of going, oh hey, I just stole 5 of your artists that you desperately need because there's another house on fire and yours is only smoldering. So.
Yeah.
But that you're going to be completely engulfed in flames in the next week because of this, so you're basically sitting there going, great, I know now that I am going to be in deep trouble next week.
Yeah.
But, higher management has other priorities, and, it's just kind of tough luck for you. And then, we always, at the end of the day, everybody wants to avoid overtime. Everybody wants to avoid burning out their best people. And it's always, to me, it's heartbreaking to see your best people, and you're looking at them perhaps sitting in the room next to you, and you're about to bring down the hammer on all of them, and that you're going to
crusher of souls and weekends.
Yeah, you're gonna crush them, and it just feels terrible, and you do it over and over again. Suddenly you're sitting there on a Friday afternoon having drinks, and you're kind of like looking sheepishly at your team, and you're going, guys, I know I've already asked this for you like last month, but guess what? We have another crunch week coming up, and I'm, going to need to ask who can give me 3 extra hours over the next week every day, for 2 weeks, and you're like hating yourself,
So that's why I'm personally such a big fan of this distribution curve, because I think it allows you to, as simple as it is, it allows you to model in some of those spikes, right? To kind of model some of those things that we're going to go on, as opposed to sort of this flat distribution. And I think that's something that I've missed in a lot of other sort of companies there, the ability to say, so this is what this show is going to look like, right? Or, this is what this show is going to look like. And we can kind of plan for this there, right? And I think what ends up happening is every other company sort of does this, right? And that's all perfectly fine. But then there are 3 other episodes that are all delivering in the same week, or one's delivering the week before, and the reality is that episode is, this, right? Or they didn't get what they needed, so it's going to be that. So I think being able to use data to at least inform where the landmines are in advance is part of the goal on things. You know what I mean? So, all right, gang. Well, let's go for it. Yep. After you.
I was just going to say that for the crewing and distribution and everything like that, I think the issues I've had previously is not because I don't have the data to be able to show, is being able to convince people further up that burning out the crew is not the best way to go about it. And
completely agree.
I've actually quit 2 different studios because their philosophy was, we never say no to work, we say yes, and then we figure out how to do it. And it was like, I'm not sacrificing my crew when I'm telling you it's not possible, and you're not doing anything to help it. So I was like, nope, I don't want to be a part of the scenario. But having those people are very money based, I find, and being able to be like, okay, here's that scenario that you said, here's how much it's actually going to end up costing us. And I feel like they'd maybe be more receptive to that.
Well, and that's a little bit of what I'm trying to do here, is give you, I call them lenses, even when I'm doing that, and you're able to look at like all of your different outcomes and scenarios, and look at them not just purely profit-based. Like, sure, profit's important. Which is the most profitable scenario, right? And actually, this is supposed to sort from biggest to smallest. So some things, So, this is your most profitable scenario here. This is your least profitable scenario here right now, right? Boom. But I also want to be able to, look at other sort of things and other dimensions, right? So maybe you're looking at capacity and where those sort of thresholds are cumulatively or monthly on things. What are some of the averages? We all know that folks can handle a few little bumps along the way, but are we doing overtime just consistently on things? So being able to see patterns in all of that and sort accordingly is a little bit of the goal there, and not just what's the end goal. It's great if we're profitable. That's absolutely a huge factor, having been in the hot seat there running a studio. But then we also just need to deliver, right? If we don't deliver to our clients well and sort of do that, then you don't get the repeat work coming back in because it was a little too just in time or a little too nerve-wracking. and on their next episode, they're like, well, maybe we should give them less of the challenging work and more of the C-level work because they seem to struggle to get the show across the finish line. So I think it's all kind of connected, and I think all of that can be sort of factored in the decision making. If it's just in the spreadsheet world, there's nothing in a spreadsheet that can easily tell you client happiness there, right, and sort of sentiment data on things. And I want to try and be able to head that route and be able to measure outcomes on dimensions other than just EBITDA. So, all right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Kay. So one last little kind of quick share on things. I do have this form here, and I'm going to sort of share it again in the chat. If you're interested in the individual producer sort of free sign-up piece, you're welcome to, again, reach out to me personally, or you can sort of fill this form out here, and so I'm going to just reach out to folks when it's kind of ready. I'd love to get a few people in sooner than later to be testing on things there too, but this is going to be available. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in the chat. I know we're all seeing each other's faces here. I'm going to paste this in here again, and you are welcome to send me something there. I would welcome it and appreciate it. So thanks everyone who stuck around. I really appreciate the feedback there today, and feel free to reach out if you want to ask me any questions directly. Okay.
Great. Oh, John, before I go, I had one last observation, more of just a bigger picture thing. In terms of implementation, I can see how this software would work great and could be sort of adopted pretty painlessly for boutique companies, like one that I recently worked for, that's a small company but has multiple locations, et cetera. This is perfect. And they have a very lightweight pipeline, so this can integrate quickly. But for larger companies that have invested a lot of time and money into developing very elaborate bespoke pipelines, I'm not a pipeline specialist, so I can't really get any more detailed than that. But I can see how, for the pipeline engineers, they might kind of go, oh, well, this is, this won't fit into X, Y, Z the way that we're, implementing our workflow, and our pipeline won't, I don't see how we can talk to this, for example. So I imagine you've given that some thought, but
it's very much about that node-based kind of granular primitive type of thing there, where we try to make it as this is a soft answer to your question, but yes, we try to make it. There's a lot of great tools that are on the market that are all API driven. There's a company called Zapier, depending how you pronounce it, which is really about being able to pull in things from any source, transform that data into something that the other system needs, and you're really just connecting these pieces together, right? So I love the Lego analogy there too. So maybe you've got one type of Lego and I've got another piece of Lego. It's building these pieces that make sure that I can connect to your type of Lego to my connect Lego, so we can actually bring those things together there. And that's a big part of what we're working on right now, is trying to get this as modular as possible. It's a lot of work because it means you have to build the software differently, right? You can write the software very hard-coded and just force things to happen, but then very quickly you're forcing it for one type of use case, and the next one isn't quite the same, and then you're forcing it for that and forcing it for that. So the art is in making these pieces as generic and as robust as possible, so they're easy to connect together. I know that was a soft answer, David, but we're thinking about that. So case in point, there's a couple companies we've talked to. It's like, this is really, really cool, but we have our own native time tracking solution, right? We're not using ShotGrid's time tracking. It's like, okay, cool. I'd obviously need to see what it's like, but the core principles are still the same there. You've got people, you've got departments. What is the data, right? And as long as I'm able to map that data to the data structures in our world, that's all integratable there too. So that was a long answer to an easy question, but that's what we're thinking.
Cool. Thanks again for the presentation.
Sweet. All right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you giving me your Tuesday morning. All right.
Thanks. Have a great day.
And I was just going to say something really quick. I'm working client side at the moment, but we're waiting for like the final funding and everything like that to come through.
Yeah.
So I have time on my hands at the moment. If you're needing any help with anything, with testing or anything like that, I'd love to be a part and work with you, because the software is amazing. That being said, I can maybe test it from a client side point of view a little bit too, to talk to like my executive producer to see if it's something we want to kind of bring in to try out.
I'd love to
I'll
explore that some more, Rosen, because I'm trying to obviously understand the client or the in-house stuff really, really well. But I'd love to find out how big of a problem it is for the client side piece there, like that, multiple bids and that. It'd be fantastic to work with you on that.
Yeah. And then I used to, when I worked at WET, I also worked on the crewing side of things and looking at every single project that was in-house, total crew, working with the department managers and the department managers as well as the producers to see how much crew the producers needed, how much crew each department manager needed, how they were allocating it, and how that was all brought together. And I see like this software would have been perfect for them because it was a crazy Excel document that needed to be downloaded and uploaded to do all the calculations and everything. So that is some insight that I could bring into it as well.
That'd be fantastic. Appreciate that. I'll reach out to you for sure. I would love to get that insider knowledge. That would be great. So,
awesome.
Jacob, thanks for joining. We're actually just wrapping up there, but it's all been recorded, and I'll be kind of posting that later on today. I'm also doing another one of these at 10 p.m. PST tonight as well for some folks internationally as well. So, anyone else welcome to join, and I will copy, paste, repeat. So, all right, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Bye, everyone.